So in a previous video, I showcased how to use the FMDataLab Role Scores tool to identify transfer targets in my very first season as the first Vienna manager, which I then expanded on by showing off a spreadsheet I created to help me find the squad's best 11 based on data exported from the Role Scores tool. I also took it a step further by comparing my best 11 to the other clubs in the league best 11s, just to see how far off the pace we were and, more importantly, where our weaknesses were to inform my recruitment strategy for the season. Now, I did have quite a few of you asking for that spreadsheet, but I thought, why not go one better? I've gone ahead and integrated all that functionality and then some directly into FMDataLab with two new tools, the Squad Best 11 and the League Best 11, but I'll get to those in a moment. Now, I'll be honest, I thought that this would maybe take me a couple of weeks at most, but here we are, a month and a half later. So yeah, apologies for the delay, but trust me, it's worth it. So before we dive into these new features, you'll need to make sure you're signed up and logged in to FMDataLab. This is a necessary step due to the best 11 tools using the tactic creator to calculate your squad's best 11. This means that you'll be creating your own tactics that are saved directly to your user account, and the best 11 tools will crunch the role scores for each position based on your created tactic. So to get started, you'll need to export a player list from Football Manager using the custom FMDataLab views. These views have been designed to capture the right data for these tools. Now, if you've already been using the Role Scores tool and have previously downloaded the Role Scores views, you're good to go. Both of the best 11 tools rely on the exact same set of views as the Role Scores tool, so no need to go through all the faff of downloading them again. But if you haven't used the Role Scores tool before, you'll need to grab the Role Scores views from the Mediafire link on the FMDataLab website. I've already covered this process in my first video and also within the best 11 tutorial on the website, so I'm not going to repeat the whole process here because, let's be honest, this video is already going to be long enough without a rerun of that tutorial. You can catch my very first video for all the details, just follow along there and you'll be set up in no time. Before we dive into exporting player lists from FM for the best 11 tools, there are a few important caveats and restrictions I do need to go over first. You can view all of these within the best 11 tutorial page on the site. If you already watched my first video or are very familiar with the Role Scores tool, then most of this will look familiar. One point I do have to stress is that if you've got player attribute masking enabled, the League Best 11 tool will not give you reliable results and that will skew your analysis. Also, be sure to double check that you're using the correct FMDataLab view before exporting. Don't be tempted to use a custom view or even the FMDataLab Moneyball view, as you will get some errors. Now, if you do happen to run into any issues, whether in FM or within the exported HTML, usually the best course of action is to switch back to the default skin if you happen to be using a custom one, then clear your in-game cache, and then delete the FMDataLab view and then re-import that FMDataLab view. That tends to clear up most problems without too much faffing around. As for the restrictions, this is where player limits come in, and they're necessary to stop your browser from throwing a tantrum and crashing on you constantly. So for the Squad Best 11 tool, you'll be limited to a maximum of 200 players per exported file. Now, you really shouldn't go over 200 players unless you're Chelsea, of course. And for the League Best 11 tool, that cap is raised to 5,000 players. Right, now we've got all those details out of the way, let's get stuck into using the Squad Best 11 tool. But first things first, we'll need to go to FM. So once you're in FM, head over to your squad screen. Now you can go to any squad screen, it doesn't necessarily have to be your squad, so you can go to any of your sort of competitions in your league if you wish, but I'm just going to stick with my current squad here. Now at this point you'll want to double check that you have the FMDataLab squad view selected and not the FMDataLab Moneyball squad view, so sorry about that, I'm clearly not cut out for naming things, but just don't worry, I've made that mistake more times than I'd like to admit. If you're keen to fine tune your selection a bit, feel free to apply a few filters. You might want to hide players that are out on loan, for example, or are potentially injured, especially if you're trying to find your best 11 for your next match. Then if you're familiar enough with all the FMDataLab tools, you select the first player in the list and hit Control or Command A. Now, this is always temperamental for me the first time I do it, so I usually have to go to another screen and then come back again. And then make sure the first player selected, then hit Control or Command A to select all players in the list, and then Control Command P to bring up the print dialog, make sure web page is selected, click OK, give your file a name and a location, and then click Save. So back over to FMDataLab, you'll want to head to the shiny new Squad Best 11 tool. just hover over the Best 11 navigation option and select Squad Best 11. Once you're on the page, you'll notice a simple form with two fields. The first field is to choose your tactic and the second is to upload your exported FM file. If you haven't set up a tactic yet, there's a section in the Best 11 tutorial about creating tactics, and I also covered this feature in my first video. Once you've created a tactic, use the select tactic drop down to choose a tactic you've set up. After that, move on to the Squad Best 11 file field where you can select your exported squad HTML file from your system's file explorer. Once you've chosen both the tactic and the file, all you need to do is click the submit button. Now, if you are curious how the Best 11 is actually calculated, I might go into that in a brief video in the future, but to keep it simple for now, it essentially identifies the top players for each role in the squad, then runs through every combination of 11 players that are mapped over to the positions in your tactic. Then it looks for the lineup of 11 players that gives you the highest combined role score. So yeah, sometimes it'll put players in a position that's not their main position, but it could still be the better call for the overall team role score. There's a lot of nuance going on under the hood here, but that's the gist of it. As always, if you run into any hiccups, just drop me a line in the comments or hit me up on Twitter or my email, which is fmdatalab@gmail.com. Alright, so once your Squad Best 11 is calculated, you'll be greeted with, well, let's call it an organised chaos kind of page here. UI and UX are definitely not my strong points, so sorry about that. Now the first thing you might notice here is the table. Don't be put off by the sheer volume of information that's been thrown in your face right now, it's all there for a good reason. This table showcases your Best 11 squad. The table itself is packed with useful columns. Each column provides some handy insights that allow you to assess your team's overall strengths, potential weaknesses, and areas for improvement. Let's break down some of the key columns in this table. First up, we've got the position, role, duty column. Each cell here is color-coded to match FM's color scheme from the tactics screen. It shows the position, the role, and the duty for each player in your squad, giving you a quick visual of where everyone's lining up. Next up, we have the name column, which is pretty straightforward. This one displays the player's name for each position. If you do click on a name, it will open up the player details panel, which is familiar territory if you've used the role scores tool before. And also in the name column, just to make things a little easier, there's also a clipboard icon next to each player's name. Clicking this copies their name directly to your clipboard so you can easily paste it into FM. The role score column shows each player's role score for their assigned role in the Best 11 based on the tactic that you've chosen. The role rank column essentially ranks your players within the squad by comparing their role score to the best player in that role at the start of a Football Manager save, based on a new top role scores dataset. So let's hit pause on the Squad Best 11 tool just for a moment and dive into this top role scores dataset. You can actually find this dataset yourself and analyse to your heart's content. You can view it by scrolling down to the footer and selecting the top role scores from the dataset options. This dataset offers a nifty tool to highlight the highest scoring players for each role at the start of a Football Manager save. The table on this page includes all 117 roles and which player has the top role score at the beginning of an FM save for each role, along with the role score for that role. So this dataset has a main priority to showcase a different approach to rating and comparing role scores. So before, if you have used the role scores tool, you're probably just comparing players' role scores with other role scores, but that can sometimes lead you astray. Instead, it might be more effective to compare the relative gap between a player's role score and the top player in that role. Basically, you compare each role's role score percentage difference from the top player in that role with one another instead, rather than comparing the raw role scores directly. This way, you can see which roles put your player closest to the elite level. It's a subtle change in approach, but it makes all the difference. So why is this comparison method more advantageous than comparing role scores directly with one another? Comparing role scores across different positions can be misleading, as each role prioritizes distinct attributes weighted according to its unique demands. Some roles by nature may skew towards attribute values that tend to be higher than other attributes, resulting in inflated role scores compared to other roles. For example, you can use this dataset. You can see that Messi holds the highest role score from all 117 roles as a trequartista in the attacking duty, with a role score of 17.59, while we have Jose Gaya, who holds the lowest role score from all 117 roles as an inverted wing-back in the attacking duty, with a role score of 14.84. That's a 2.75 difference here between these two elite players in their respective roles. So, When determining a player's best role, for instance, let's just say between a trequartista here when they have a role score of 16.22 and an inverted wingback role score of 14.16, you might initially favour the trequartista role purely based on the higher score. However, the comparison to top players in each role tells a different story. The trequartista role is 1.37 points below the best in that role. That's a difference of 8.45%. While the inverted wingback is only 4.8% behind the top player in that role. This suggests that the inverted wingback role is closer to the elite standard, making that wingback role potentially a better option. Even within the same position, such as strikers, the scores can vary greatly from role to role. As mentioned, Messi holds the highest score as a trequartista with a role score of 17.59, while the lowest rated striker role, complete forward in the attacking duty, is Erling Haaland's score of 15.96. Which shows a 1.63 difference between the top players within the same position. Even when we compare the best rated wingback role, which is the no nonsense fullback with 15.92 as a role score, against the lowest rated striker role, as mentioned before, the complete forward with 15.96, that's still a 0.04 difference. So even the highest rated wingback role is still lower than the lowest rated striker role. This demonstrates that wingbacks as a position group tend to have lower role scores. Therefore, comparing wingback roles to those of strikers or any other position for that matter is maybe unproductive, as the scoring tends to differ greatly across roles. Therefore, comparing the percentage difference between the top players in each role can sometimes be a better comparison. So from this new top role scores dataset, I've aimed to do that. This dataset has now been integrated into 3 new columns in the role scores tool, so let's jump over there and break down what's new. Previously, the role scores tool had 3 columns in the best roles column group, which simply showed the highest role score for each player based on either the roles that they can play, the selected roles, or the full set of 117 roles. Straightforward, but maybe not the most refined approach. However, for a more nuanced evaluation, you may wish to examine which role scores for each player are closest to those of the best player in those roles, to evaluate how close a given player is from being the best player in a particular role. So the first new column that's been added is the best position role, but based on the rank. This identifies which role that a player can play, where the percentage difference between their role score and that of the highest scoring player in the same role is the smallest. It's essentially showing you the player's best role at matching the elite in a role they're capable of playing. The second new column is the best selected role based on rank, which is similar but only focuses on the roles that you selected from the role selection feature, regardless if a player can play in that role or not. And lastly, the overall best role column does the evaluation but across all the roles, regardless of whether a player can play in that role or not. Now, a word of caution here. This column might sometimes throw up something like inverted wingback. Why? Because as mentioned earlier, some roles, like wingbacks, tend to have lower role score ceilings, making it easier for a player to rank closer to the elite in that role. So don't be surprised if this column flags up some strange suggestions. You'll probably want to refer to the best position role more often than not. Alright, let's get back to the role rank column in the squad best 11 table. Now, as we touched on earlier, this isn't just about comparing raw role scores to one another. Instead, it adds a layer of context, showing you how each player's role score measure up against the elite players in their respective roles. Essentially, it ranks all players in the best 11 based on how close they are to matching or even surpassing the best in their role, by ranking via the percentage difference from the top player in their role that's determined from the new top role scores dataset. Next up, we have the score rank column, which ranks players in the best 11 purely based on their role scores. Essentially a quick way to see who has the highest role score in their role compared to their teammates. Now, as I mentioned earlier, comparing role scores across different roles can be a bit misleading, so this ranking might not always tell the full story. Next, we have the competition level column, and before we dive too deep into this column, we're going to take another slight detour over to our second new dataset, which is the competition benchmarks dataset. You can also find this in the footer of the website in the dataset section. Now, for those of you who have tinkered with the role scores trajectories feature in the role scores tool, this might already look familiar, but I have added a little bit more granularity. This dataset gives you a solid overview of role scores from regular starters across a hand-picked selection of competitions. This dataset is based on data pulled from the end of an FM24 season. So here, you can select a role from the drop-down, and you will see the list update with all competitions, and beside each the average role score of regular starters in that competition, or subset of that competition. Previously, this dataset was only visible in the role score trajectories chart found in the player details panel in the role scores tool. where you select a role and then the reference lines in the chart for different competitions would appear on the chart indicating the average role score of regular starters in that competition, and give you a sense of what competition level the selected player's role score is likely to match up with. Then below the chart you see a similar list to the competition benchmarks dataset with the average role scores for regular starters in your selected role for each competition. But now there's more. You see, before we only had the average role scores for regular starters in each competition. Now I've added a little bit more depth. You can see the average role scores for the top 25, 10 and 5% of regular starters within each competition. This allows you to get more specific so you can pinpoint a player's competition level in a particular role with more precision. So when you're looking at the role scores trajectory chart in the player details panel, you can now toggle these competition benchmark subsets. The chart will update the reference lines accordingly, and instead of just showing you the average score for the competition benchmarks in the data point tooltips in the chart, it can now show you how close a player's predicted role score is to those competition subsets. It's a great way to gauge whether a player is closer to the top tier or just floating around the middle of a competition. For more details, you can pop over to the competition benchmarks tutorial page. Alright, no more detours, I promise. Let's get back to the competition level column in the squad best 11 table. So the competition level column essentially gives you a snapshot of where a player stands competitively for their assigned role in the squad, highlighting the competition the player is currently performing closest to for that role. Now, how does it figure all this out? Well, it uses the player's role score for the role they've been assigned in the squad. It then cross-references that score within the competition benchmarks dataset for that role and finds the competition subset with the closest role score match, which helps determine the player's current competitive level in that role. For each player, it prefixes this info with whether they're performing above or below the competition's average role score for the subset they fall into. It also lists the rank of that competition and subset within the role. There are 48 different competition levels in total for the ranking. There are 12 competitions and each are split into 4 subsets, the average, top 25, 10 and 5%. So if you're ever curious about how these comparisons are made or want to see the finer details of how far above or below a player is from their competitive level, just hover over the info icon to the right of the competition name. It opens up a handy tooltip that breaks it all down for you. Alright, so next up we've got the competition rank column. It ranks players within the squad based on how close they are to the highest level of competition for their role. Basically, it's whose competition level ranks closest to the top. Next up, we have the compare top benchmark column, which displays the percentage difference between each player's role score to the best player in their respective role, using the top role scores dataset to determine the best player in each role. The percentage value for each player in this column is actually the value that's used to rank players in the role rank column. So the higher the percentage here, in comparison to their teammates, the higher their role rank will be. Now we move on to the best ranked tactic role column. Essentially, it looks at all the roles in the tactic and finds which one where the player's role score has the smallest percentage gap compared to the highest scoring player in that role based on the top role scores dataset. And just like the new overall best role column in the role scores tool, you might notice some surprise results, like the wing back roles popping up again due to the lower role score salience in that position compared to other position roles. Then there's the best score role column, which highlights the role within the tactic where the player has the highest role score regardless of whether they can actually play in that position or not. Finally, the other columns here mirror some of the player info you'll already recognise from the role scores tool, as well as the same computer score columns. Just below the main best 11 squad table, you'll find a secondary table. This table is all about looking at the squad as a collective, providing a snapshot of how your team performs as a unit rather than just picking apart individual players. So first up we have the overall column. This value represents the combined role score of the entire squad. Next is the average column. Now this one's pretty straightforward, it's just the overall score divided by 11. Basically this gives you the average role score of your squad players. So next up we've got the competition level column. The comparison here is derived from the average role scores from the selected tactic. They're aggregated from the competition benchmarks dataset to produce an overall squad score for each competition, to then enable the identification of the closest competition benchmark in a comparison with the overall role score of the squad. In other words, it tells you this is the level your squad is most likely to compete in, and the rank helps you determine how close your squad is at competing at the highest level. Now, onto the compare overall top benchmark column, which value compares the overall role score of the entire squad to the aggregated role scores of the top players in each role within the chosen tactic derived from the top role scores dataset. And finally we have 3 straightforward but potentially useful columns, the average age, wage and transfer value of your squad. Just below the squad table you'll find the overview section. This is where we dive into the squad's best 11 strengths and weaknesses. The strength section is all about showing off where your squad really shines, while the weaknesses bit, well, let's just say it's more there to gently remind you of the areas that could use a little TLC. The key player section includes the 3 highest role ranking players as determined by the role rank column. For each player in the squad's key players, it includes that player's key role attributes, which are the 3 attributes with the highest values across all weighted attributes for their designated role. These attributes highlight the areas in which they excel as a player within their assigned role. And then there's the key attributes for the entire squad. These are the 5 attributes, excluding set piece attributes, that have the highest values on average. And then in the weaknesses section, here you'll find the weakest players. I know it's a fairly harsh term, but I couldn't think of anything better. This highlights the 3 bottom role rank players in your squad, again based on the same role rank column values. And just like the key players, we're breaking down the weakest role attributes. This is the area where frankly they could use a bit of improvement. For the squad as a whole, you'll see the weakest attributes, which are the 5 areas which on average your team is not exactly setting the world alight. So just beneath the strengths and weaknesses section, you'll find the tactical area section, which gives you an examination of positional strengths and weaknesses based on your selected tactic. You can hover over the icons in any tactical area. A handy tooltip will pop up revealing precisely which positions are included in each area. Each tactical area comes with an area role rank figure, which evaluates how well your squad's tactical area aligns with the average role scores of the top performing players in those positions as determined from the top role scores dataset. This comparison value is then compared against the same comparison value of other tactical areas within your squad to get that rank, to measure how close each tactical area is to the top players in their respective areas. Within each tactical area, you'll find several detailed sections, including a table similar to the squad overall table. The first column is the average score column. This figure represents the average overall role score for that tactical area, calculated by the average role scores of each player assigned to the positions within that area. Next, there's the area role rank column, which mirrors that same value as the ranking for the tactical area. The area score rank column, however, ranks the average role score of all players in a tactical area within your squad, comparing it directly with the average role scores of players in the other tactical areas. Then we have the competition level column. This functions similar to the column with the same name in the overall squad table, but instead of aggregating role score benchmarks for the entire squad from the competition benchmarks dataset, it focuses on aggregating role score benchmarks specifically for the roles within the tactical area. The area competition rank column ranks how close the players in the tactical area are to the highest level of competition based on the regular starters in the tactical area from the competition benchmarks dataset. In addition, there's also the compare top benchmark column, which measures the average role scores of players in your squad's tactical area against the average role score of top players in the same roles as identified in the top role scores dataset. The percentage figure here is the value that is actually used to rank the tactical area against the other tactical areas in the area role rank column. So the higher the percentage here in comparison with the other tactical areas, the higher the area role rank will be. And this table also features the average age, wage and transfer value for all the players in the tactical area. Below this table you'll find another strengths and weaknesses section, which mirrors the corresponding sections in the overview section above, with just a couple of minor tweaks. Here, the strengths and weaknesses are evaluated in the context of the specific tactical area, allowing for a sharper analysis of how individual players contribute to their designated roles within your chosen tactic. Additionally, this section highlights only the top, key and weakest player within the tactical area rather than the usual trio. In cases where only one player is assigned to a position within the tactical area, like a goalkeeper for example, that player will be recognised as both the key and the weakest player. So also within the Squad Best 11 tool, there is a Squad Select section, which allows you to easily switch between different squad views using the provided tabs. One of the options is the Rotated Squad. So the Rotated Squad section is similar to the Best 11 section, but here it pulls together a rotation squad without repeating anyone from your Best 11, assuming you've got enough players available, that is. So if you've ever wondered how your squad would handle rotation during those heavy fixture periods or cup runs, this is your go-to section. It's also where you'll really start to see any squad depth issues. The layout here mimics the Best 11 section, but with two key differences. First, you'll notice the new column in the player table, the Compare Best 11 column. The values showcase the percentage differences in the role scores of each player in the rotated squad with their counterparts in the Best 11. Such a comparison can provide vital insights into squad depth, revealing areas where resources may require some strengthening to improve squad depth. The second addition is down in the overall squad table, the Compare Overall Best 11 column. This column gives you the difference in percentage between the overall role score of the rotated squad against the Best 11 overall role score. It's a good way to see the overall difference in strength between your main and rotated squad. Now, another option in the squad select section is squad depth. Selecting this tab will reveal the squad depth section. It gives you a snapshot of your squad's depth across all the positions in your selected tactic. This is somewhat similar to the squad depth section in Football Manager. The squad depth section highlights up to 3 of the top scoring players for each position role. Plus, it'll even flag the most promising youth player, which is anyone 23 or younger, for each position. Positions with the strongest depth get a little purple biceps icon next to the position name. This little badge of honour is awarded to the position with the smallest gap in role scores between the top and the bottom of the 3 players in that position. On the flip side, if your squad is looking a bit thin in a position, you'll see a red thumbs down icon, indicating that this position has the largest gap between the top and 3rd best player in a position, highlighting a potential squad depth issue. And if you have any position that falls a little short of having enough depth in that area, you'll be alerted with an orange warning icon next to the position name. So up in the top right corner of actually both of the best 11 tools, you'll find a bunch of action buttons. First up, there's the update tactic button. Clicking this lets you swap to a new tactic and recalculate your best 11 based on that. Next, there's the upload button. This one's for uploading a new HTML file to recalculate a best 11. Then, clicking on the show trajectories button, you can show the roll score trajectories in the roll score column, similar to what you can do in the roll scores tool. Finally, there's the edit roll weights button. Just like in the roll scores tool, this lets you adjust the roll weights to your heart's content, but do keep in mind that any changes here will have a ripple effect on all values tied to either the static top roll scores or competition benchmark datasets, which have been calculated using the default weights. Alright, so that's the squad best 11 covered. Hopefully I haven't bored you all to tears with all this data thrown in your face, so if you're still awake and ready for more, we're about to dive into the league best 11 tool. So before we get started, let's export our league competitors in FM. Now this process differs a little bit from how the roll scores tool operates. In FM, first navigate to the player search screen. Make sure the current view is set to the FMDataLab player search view. Next, you'll want to uncheck both interested in checkboxes to ensure you can view all players regardless of their interest in joining your club. Then go ahead and click on the new search button. Here you'll want to filter clubs to display. Now I know I've dubbed this feature as the League Best 11, but it's a versatile tool. You can use it to compare your squad to any array of squads. Perhaps you want to size up your next opponent, or if you're competing on a continental stage like the Champions League, maybe you want to see how you measure up against the clubs you'll be facing. But for now I'm going to keep it simple. I'm just going to set my filter to club, then division, and it will automatically select your current division. Next, you'll want to find the exclude button here at the bottom of the dialog window. Click that and be sure to uncheck your club's players. This way they'll appear in the player list as long as the current filter allows it. Once that's done, press OK and then just export the player list in the usual way. Now with your league player list exported, head back to FMDataLab, hover over the Best 11 navigation option again and select League Best 11. So just like the Squad Best 11 tool, here you'll need to select a tactic and your exported league player list HTML file to export it from Football Manager, and then click the Submit button. Once successfully uploaded, the League Best 11 screen will be presented to you. The Clubs Best 11 section here presents a list of all clubs featured within your uploaded HTML file. The clubs are ranked from the highest to the lowest overall Best 11 squad score. The selected tactic is employed to ascertain the best possible 11 squad for each club, yielding each club's highest achievable squad roll score. On each club item, you have the club's rank compared to the other club's name, their overall squad score, and their average squad roll score. You can click on a club's name in the accordion list here to view the best 11 of the selected club. This section mirrors the squad best 11 table with a few additions. First, we have the league rank column, which ranks each player in the squad against all other players occupying the same position and role from the other club's best 11s. This ranking provides a clear indication which players are performing at the highest and lowest levels in the league. Then we have the Compare League Best 11 column, which highlights the percentage difference between the roll score of each player within the selected squad against the roll scores of the player in the corresponding position in the League Best 11 squad, which we'll get to in a moment. This comparison provides insight into how individual players measure up with the broader context of the best in the league. The My Club dropdown allows you to select your own club from a list of all clubs included in your uploaded HTML file. Once selected, an additional column, Compare My Club, is added to the tables of all the other clubs. The Compare My Club column reveals the percentage difference in roll scores between the players in your club's best 11 and those occupying the same position and roles in the opposing squad. A negative percentage with the green thumbs up icon indicates that your player has a higher role score than the corresponding player in the selected squad, while a positive percentage with a red thumbs down icon indicates the opposite, that the player in the selected squad has a higher role score than your player. You also have an additional column comparing my club overall in the overall table below the squad table. The Compare My Club Overall column reveals the percentage difference in the overall squad role scores between players in your club's best 11 and the selected club's best 11. So any player's name that's highlighted in the yellow and has a little star icon indicates that that player is included in the league's best 11, which is what we're going to do next. The Select View section provides a way to switch between viewing all the club's best 11 squads and the league's overall best 11. The League Best 11 section presents Best 11 squad using the selected tactic from all players in your uploaded HTML file, just like how the main squad Best 11 tool works. The tables displayed in the League Best 11 section matches that of the similar tables found in the main squad Best 11 tool, with a few minor differences. First, we have the name of the club for each player in the League Best 11 squad added as a column. If one of the players that's in your club, as derived from the My Club dropdown, are in the League Best 11 squad, the club will be highlighted in green with a thumbs up icon. There's also an additional column, Compare My Club. This column reveals the percentage difference in role scores between the players in your club's best 11 and those occupying the same positions in the league best 11. This provides valuable insight into how your club fares against those in the league best 11 squad. Additionally, in the overall League Best 11 table, there is an additional column, Compare My Club Overall, which reveals the percentage difference in the League Best 11 overall squad score against your club's Best 11 overall squad score. So there we have it. I hope you find both of these Best 11 tools useful and you have some fun playing around with the datasets, and that hopefully they can help elevate your squad to new heights. And hey, if you've enjoyed these tools and found them useful, do me a solid and give the video a like, subscribe for more, and follow me on Twitter, and until next time, goodbye for now.